My paper is called At the Intersections of Conceptual Art, Politics, and Care, Exploring the Relevance of a Collage Aesthetic for Women Art Teachers. And I begin here with a quote from Lucy Lepard from a 2014 interview. The research was daily rather than delving into libraries. What's happening as reported in newspapers, high country news, locally? Every now and then I get asked about my methodology, which I don't really have. I'm not an academic, and I always say my methodology is one thing leads to another. That's really the way I write and the way I do everything. People are always saying, so what's the thesis of this book? And I go, thesis? It hasn't got one. It's just one thing leading to another. I love weaving things together and finding strange juxtapositions, a sort of collage aesthetic. In one part of a 1977 essay titled The Pink Glass Swan, Upward and Downward Mobility in the Art World, Lucy Lepard expressed her disappointment in the social achievements of conceptual art. According to Lepard, while conceptual art may have attempted to democratize art for the public through its ordinary and expensive media and its efforts to rail against the institutional structures of the art world, the art created was largely incomprehensible to the public due to its neutral, elitist content and its patronizing approach. Beyond her concern that conceptual art was seemingly revolutionary while not actually reaching the general public, Lepard often critiqued the restrictions of conceptual art that forced artists to choose between art and politics. Looking back on the movement, Lepard acknowledged that, quote, conceptual art in the broadest sense was a kind of laboratory for innovations in the rest of the century, while also admitting that the works themselves looked timid and disconnected in comparison to the political activism of the times and the activist art of the late 1970s and 1980s, end quote. For Lepard, many feminist artists of the time were situated within this sort of tension between conceptual art and politics, and in fact challenged the boundaries between the two. In particular, Lepard often wrote about women artists who took up what she called a collage aesthetic. These artists employed some of the strategies and methodologies of conceptual art, such as provocative juxtapositions and a concern with concept over product, but used these tactics to provoke social and political concerns important to women, including matters of representation, subject-centered inquiry, and challenges to a private-public binary, largely foreclosed by the constraints of conceptual art in its purest form. In describing a collage aesthetic, Lepard referred to, quote, collage in the broadest sense, not pasted papers or any particular technique, but the juxtaposition of unlike realities to create a new reality, which she aptly explained in an essay under the heading, This Up Against That. As an example of collage, Lepard described the media performance in Mourning and in Rage by the group Ariadne, led by Suzanne Lacey and Leslie Labowitz. As visual opposition to the sensationalized and demeaning news coverage of women victims of the Hillside Strangler in Los Angeles, the public performance at City Hall, covered by local and state news, expressed both grief for victims and rage over violence against women. As Lepard explained, works like In Mourning and in Rage provided the public with information contrary to what it typically received, and they did so through provocative visual and often textual or language-based juxtapositions that aimed to prompt a reconsideration of the truth. Interestingly, Lepard suggested that collage tactics may have been especially relevant for social feminists, whose identities could themselves be described as a collage of disparate, not yet fully compatible parts. I would argue that even today, women positioned within various and often intersecting social, personal, and professional contexts, take for example, women who teach art in public schools, could find resonance with Lepard's description of an identity composed of disparate, not yet fully compatible parts. Women who teach art in schools are situated within multiple discursive tensions that might be embodied or felt as incompatible parts. Are they artists or teachers? Professionals worthy of respect, or servants and childcare providers for the tax-paying public? Workers to be held accountable by quantifiable measures regardless of context, or compassionate nurturers for each unique child in their care. Given the complexity of these competing discourses, I propose that just as collage tactics offered a valuable mode of experimentation and provocation for social feminists, they have generative potential for women art teachers as well. Therefore, in this short paper as collage, I have taken up Lepard's premise that a collage aesthetic grounded in the tactics of conceptual art can be employed as a kind of positive fragmentation that, quote, uses political consciousness as a glue with which to get the pieces into some sort of new order, though not necessarily as a new whole, since there is no single way out. Following this premise, this paper as collage explores, in particular, the concept of care as it is produced in the experiences of women art teachers. The fragments I have reordered include artifacts and dialogue from my research with early career art teachers, writing around the concept of care in teaching, and current social media discourses related to women in teaching that have appeared during the COVID-19 global pandemic in August 2020. My aim is to follow what Lepard calls the healing instinct of collage, to put these fragments in a new sort of order, one that does not create a new whole, but that prompts a reconsideration of the truth of care work as it pertains to women and the teaching of art in K-12 schools. The form of this paper as collage was inspired by both Lepard's own books as collage, such as 6 Years, The Dematerialization of the Art Object from 1966 to 1972, and Mary Kelly's feminist multipartite series Postpartum Document, which took place in phases from 1973 to 1979. In Postpartum Document, Kelly documented her time with her young son through small-scale framed collages made out of, for example, stained diapers, folded undershirts, her son's mark making, objects he collected as a toddler, and quotes of things he said and what she said in response. In addition, Kelly imposed her own analysis of these mother-child experiences through a Lacanian psychoanalytic lens, explaining that there were 2 levels to the work: my lived experience as a mother and my analysis as feminist of that experience. Similarly, the collage formed by this paper juxtaposes a feminist analysis of care as it relates to teaching with material documentation of the experiences of early career women art teachers and pervasive social media discourses. How might care be reconsidered? How might care be political? In her discussions about the foundational aspects and contributions of the women's movements and feminist art that was happening alongside conceptual art, Lepard highlighted art making that was cooperative, collaborative, collective. While conceptual artists may have seen themselves as cultural critics who were, according to Lepard, largely disconnected from the general public, feminist artists saw themselves as, quote, cultural workers, supporting and responding to their constituencies, unquote, often through collaborative art making. A parallel might be drawn then between feminist artists' reliance on collaboration and collective pursuits and recent conceptualizations of care by feminist authors like Joan Tronto and Maria Puig de la Bellacasa, who foreground interconnectedness and interdependency over individualism. Prior feminist conceptualizations of care, in what is often termed relational feminism, focused on care as an individual virtue expressed through dyadic relationships between a caregiver and a care receiver, such as a mother and child or teacher and student. However, both Tronto and Puig de la Bellacasa suggest a move away from such individual or dyadic theories of care and toward an understanding of care as a species activity with ethical, social, political, and cultural implications. These authors emphasize the fundamental interdependency of human and non-human relations, and therefore suggest that care must be present in the web of life in order for living to be possible. In this way, care is no longer the responsibility of the individual, but is rather a collective activity that is crucial if we are to live in our world as well as possible. By centering care as a collective endeavor that is required for living, Tronto and co-author Fisher also draw attention to the fact that care is not innocuous or something to be ignored. Rather, care is defined culturally and functions socially and politically with regards to how care gets distributed and by whom. Care is political. The collage I've offered here is political and also conceptual and collaborative, leaving space for those who engage with it to bring their own experiences into the gaps between fragments and to contribute to a reconsideration of the truth regarding the role of care in the experiences of women art teachers. A collage aesthetic carries the potential for all of these effects. What will you add?